Hello, this is Sana Chaudhry, CEO of YetiZen, and I'm here today with Brian Pass from Shepherd Mullen for our latest YetiZen Speaks online event. And we're talking about the 3 biggest IP licensing mistakes that game studios make. Hey, Brian.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful to have you. So, Brian, you have some very interesting things that you're going to be taking us through. But before we get to that, can you tell us real quick, what is it that you do as a partner at Shepherd Mullen? What your practice group is?
Sure. I sit in the entertainment, technology, and advertising group. We handle, as the name suggests, everything to do with the entertainment, media, new media industry. The focus of my practice is on the technology and new media side of the practice, but we also represent major motion picture studios and the like, as well as major game publishers and game studios, as well as early stage companies and the like. So my practice is on the technology transactional side. I do licensing agreements, and I'm excited to talk about the mistakes folks make when they're licensing in IP.
Awesome. Yeah, so we'll take us away.
Sure. Let me take over the screen here.
Perfect. We see you on the first screen.
Fabulous. So as you said, we're going to talk about the 3 biggest IP licensing mistakes that game studios should avoid. Be clear about exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about licensing in third-party IP. We're not talking about licensing out the wonderful characters and original work that you may do as a game studio. But we're talking about making games based on existing properties, and these can come from a variety of sources: movies, television. I've got an excerpt from a Star Wars game, and SpongeBob from movies and TV. Games also come out of comic books, regular books. Harry Potter comes to mind. Sports leagues, sports franchises, sports personalities, brands, and increasingly popular personas and celebrities. You see Kim Kardashian in Hollywood there, one of the most popular mobile games, really based on the persona of Kim Kardashian. When you're talking about mistakes that folks make in licensing IP, it's important to understand why enter into a third-party IP license to begin with. Well, the main reason is that you're tapping into a pre-existing fan base and an audience that already exists around that property, which should lead to higher sales for a game and lower marketing costs, which is basically means more money for you as a developer. But money's not the only reason to license a third-party IP. It also can be a launch pad for a company's basically reputation and credibility in the industry. If you secure rights to high-profile third-party IP, you can establish your reputation as a game maker for making good games, then go on to make original IP based on that reputation. What are the downsides? The downsides are that it's a tough process. It's tougher than making your own game. You have a third party to answer to. You need to get approvals from that third party about what your game looks like and how their IP is used. And that leads to longer development cycles, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. It also means an upfront expense. We had talked about kind of tailoring this presentation to mobile game makers, and one of the advantages of making a mobile game is that it's cheap to get in. You can make a low-cost investment. You can experiment. You can iterate. But when you're paying upfront fees, as folks typically do when it comes to licensing third-party IP, that involves higher risk, and you get rid of that kind of experimentation factor, or you have less room to experiment because there's more upfront cost. And sometimes it can feel less creative working within the confines of third-party IP and style guides that might be imposed upon you from the third-party licensor. And, frankly, third-party IP games have a mixed reputation for quality. Some are good, some are bad. So it's important as we think about how to avoid making mistakes is to know why you're getting into the license agreement in the first place. Are you looking to make money, or are you looking to establish reputation, or both? It's important to understand the elements of a license agreement. Those will be attached as an appendix, and you can review those and give me a call if you have questions about what those means. But let's hop right into the mistakes that people make. Mistake number one, I'll call scope screw-ups. Really means not getting what you thought you were getting out of the license, or what you thought you should have gotten from that license. You see the Kim Kardashian logo there, and I think there was a recent article where the CEO of Glue, who's the publisher of the Kim Kardashian KKH game, said that they regretted not getting music rights from Kim up front. And it was interesting, I thought, and a good lesson for game developers, which is think about everything you need and make sure you're getting it up front. So that really goes to what is the property that you're licensing. In my view, a bigger issue with the property they were licensing is the platforms and the operating systems that they were developing to. So Kim Kardashian Hollywood exists, but clearly they didn't get broader rights beyond building a game for Kim Kardashian, because as you see below, Kim came out with her own emoji app, which is a big seller in the Apple Store, called Kimoji, and Glue has no piece of that. So in my view, they didn't get all the rights that they should have. Otherwise, they would be benefiting from a Kimoji game. And I haven't really seen anybody ask, well, why is it that she was able to go off and make her own application? Now, it's not a game, so clearly the original underlying rights that Glue acquired in Kim Kardashian and those elements of her game were, it didn't cover an emoji app. It's also really critical, as I mentioned, to define those devices and platforms in ways that are meaningful. Now, suppose you have the right to make a mobile game. Does that include the right to make a tablet game? Well, maybe, maybe not. It might be helpful for you to define the operating system. So suppose you have the right to make games for Apple iOS. Does that include the right to make a game on Apple TV or for a Mac? Well, you might need a combination of defining the devices, the platforms, and the operating systems in order to make sure that you've tied up the rights and you have broad enough rights, or have the rights you think you do on all of those platforms through all those means of distribution. And then equally important is defining the territory where your rights, where you have rights. You may have worldwide rights to distribute a game, but maybe you don't have the rights to localize that game in different languages. So if you have worldwide rights, but in the English language, you might be out of luck when you look to translate that game in foreign markets. And then finally, and really critically, you need to ask yourself and figure out whether the licensor even has the rights that they say they do. So you need good legal reps and warranties from your licensor, basically saying that they have the rights to grant you the rights that they're granting, but do your own due diligence, figure it out. Chain of title is a complex undertaking, but typically these days, any property has a multiplicity of rights. A good example of that involving EA is the lawsuit that was brought by Ed O'Bannon, the former UCLA basketball player who was featured in the NCAA, in the EA's NCAA basketball game. He brought a lawsuit against EA and the NCAA, alleging in part that the game infringed his rights of privacy and publicity by using his name, likeness, appearance, and the name, likeness, and appearance of other basketball players in in the game, and EA wound up settling that case for tens of millions of dollars, and no longer makes the NCAA game. Now, clearly, EA thought they were getting the rights to use those players' names and personalities and personas and images, etc., from the NCAA, but they didn't get them from the individual players. We're actually in a situation now on behalf of a major game publisher, not directly a game license, so I can't really get into the details of it, but it involves licensing an important property for another media, and it turns out there are trademark issues around the property in certain countries. So you got to do your due diligence. You got to find out if the rights you have are clear wherever you intend to distribute. Let's move on to the second big mistake. This is really purely about dollars and cents. I'll call it economic errors, paying too much. How do you know what to pay when you enter into one of these agreements? How do you avoid overpaying? Well, typically, understanding the economics is balancing minimum guarantees, an amount which is typically in the form of an advance that you might have to pay, versus the royalty rate, which would be the ongoing percentage of revenue that you would pay to the licensor of the IP, which is really the real cost of the license. A lot of developers feel like they don't want to ever pay minimum guarantees, but if you don't pay a minimum guarantee, you might wind up with a higher royalty rate and ultimately be paying a higher effective royalty rate than you would if you paid more upfront and paid less over the life of the deal. So it's really imperative that studios balance the minimum guarantees against the royalty rate, run a lot of modeling, run a lot of projections. A good way that I've seen of understanding what the opportunity is to think about the trade-offs as kind of a mathematical formula. Kind of, is the amount that you're going to pay, is that offset by the amount of marketing costs, the cost of acquisition that you're going to save? So when you pay a minimum guarantee, you're hoping that by using the licensed IP, this is going to lower the cost relative to developing your own game by more than the amount that you're going to pay the licensor. And that's how you come out ahead versus making your own game. But making money isn't always the reason why folks sign up for a third-party IP license. And sometimes it makes sense to invest more and risk more for other reasons. One is to get to market quickly, as opposed to, in other words, it might be easier to raise money and raise capital with a third-party license in your pocket and be in business. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I represented one of the leading third-party accessory makers who wanted to get into the game business. They wanted to make handheld devices, and they took out very expensive licenses with Disney for Disney princesses, for kind of a girl's version of the handheld device, and Disney cars for kind of a boy's version. They basically did not negotiate the license and paid a big upfront guarantee just to get in the business. And ultimately, they realized they didn't want to be in that business. So mistake number 3, I call it ruining the relationship. Not ruining the relationship, but ruining the relationship. Although relationships can get ruined. And really, this boils down to the project just took too long, it was more difficult than expected, turned out to be a headache. Be realistic beforehand. IP holders, they can just be a pain. That's the way it is. It can be hard to close a deal with IP owners, and once you're in the deal, it can just take longer, be more difficult than you ever thought. Factor this in. Understand this when you plan and budget. Do your homework on the licensor, not just the underlying property, but figure out who you're dealing with what their experience and reputation has been in the industry. And then finally, pay attention to those approval processes and structure them in a way that doesn't hold up the development and the release of your game. Make those approvals concrete as to when they'll be given, what is being reviewed, the basis for rejection, and you'll be a lot happier in the end. Those are the 3 big mistakes. I hope that's been helpful.
That has been. That's very, very helpful. So Brian, quick question. We know IP licensing has been around for a very long time. Have you noticed maybe 1 or 2 of these mistakes happening more often, more recently, or are all 3 of them happening because there's just a number of new players on either end coming into the market and common learning pains unless someone has had experience?
Yeah, I think all these mistakes happen. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, we can.
All these mistakes happen, and they come in cycles. I can't say that anybody's getting any smarter over time. And there's reasons for this. There's good reasons for this. You know, when we talk about, for example, the mistake of scope screw up and not understanding what it is you're actually getting, as technology evolves, the rights have just gotten more and more complicated over time. So there's more media, there's more rights that can be split and divided. The due diligence process is just more difficult. So while it might be counterintuitive that over time people would figure this out and have a way to deal with it that's efficient, it's actually gotten probably more difficult to figure out exactly who has what rights and getting what it is that you need.
Gotcha. And which is why having an experienced law firm and an experienced legal partner is very, very important for game studios at that stage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. You put your contact info up.
Here's my contact info. If you have questions about any of these issues, feel free to give me a shout. I'd be happy to talk to anybody on off the clock, and love dealing with early stage companies. So please feel free to give me a call.
Wonderful, wonderful. Much appreciated, Brian, and thank you so much for taking the time today. I know you were recovering from a bit of an illness, so because of that, especially thank you for taking the time today and giving us this wonderful presentation. I'm sure it's going to be a great resource for many, many of the game developers that we have here on our YetiZen list, as well as on the World Wide Web on YouTube. So
hey, my pleasure.
Yeah, we hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.